Okay, thank you everybody for joining us. And sorry for the last 2 weeks. Baruch Hashem was for good things. 1 week was the golf tournament. The other week was my daughter's graduation. So Baruch Hashem was for good things. But sorry that we missed. And hopefully we're going to be back on schedule for the next few weeks. It should be regular, unless something maybe go away over the summer, or I might have a convention that falls out on Monday, Tuesday, or Wednesday. I think it's actually Tuesday and Wednesday at the end of July. But otherwise, we should be back to a regular session. Okay, so this week's parsha is Parshas Korach, and Parshas Korach is on page 820, and it's jam-packed. And just a very quick overview. Right, the beginning of the parasha speaks about Korach complaining against Moshe that he stole the kahuna, the priesthood, page 820, right? The priesthood, and gave it to Aaron, his brother, and that was nepotism, and he sort of did it all by himself. We could all be kohanim. He attracted Dasan and Aviram, who are all anyways the troublemakers, always the troublemakers, and 250 other leaders, righteous people. He sort of got them to hear his cry. We should all, Kulam Kadoshim, we're all holy people. We should all be the Kohanim. And long story short, God tells Moshe to separate himself from this group of people, right? Because Moshe says, but not everybody's in trouble. So he said, tell everybody to move away from these people. Korach and his cohort got swallowed up by the earth, very mini earthquake kind of thing, but literally the earth opened up, swallowed them up live. And then the 250 people that took a frying pan to do the Torah, which is a special kind of sacrifice with different spices and things, right? A fire went out and killed them all. And that was put to bed regarding arguing and complaining against Moshe. A pretty quick, decisive way of saying who's the boss over here, right? You don't want to mess with Moshe. And actually, no jokes, the Jewish people afterwards, it says, Madua, why are you killing Kahal Hashem? He seems to be killing the Jewish people, right? Because, these people died. And then it says that we have to explain what that means, and hopefully if we have time, we're going to go into that. Like, Moshe didn't kill them. They knew that this was from God, right? So what does that mean exactly? But they complained the next day, right? And it says, you killed the Jewish people, right? God's nation. And the Moshe and Aaron came to the to the Ohel, and God told Moshe to make sure that this doesn't happen, right? God says, God says, I'm going to kill them, karega. I'm going to eat them, achla, right? Karega, right? They're going to be all killed, not all of them, but a fire will go out and kill them, right? So Moshe falls on his face. And Moshe tells Aaron to take the machta, to take the same frying pan, the same ketores, right? And put the incense on these special things on the frying pan, the ketores, and to walk amongst the people, and that fought off the malach hamaves, the evil, the angel of death, right? The magefa, the plague, and it fought it off, and he saved the Jewish people. Right, and then after that, he tells them to take the staff. Every tribe had their own staff. Besides Moshe Rabbeinu's staff, they all had their own staff, and they all put it in the Holy of Holies. And whoever's staff was going to grow flowers, right, will be the right one for the code. That's the right tribe. And Aaron's staff is the one that grew flowers, and no one else's grew flowers. Right, and that sort of finally put to bed this whole rebellion. And then after that, the rest of the parsha. Basically, starting from page 830, after Shishi, the rest of the parsha goes into the different things that Aaron and his children will get, right? Or even Levi, different matanos, right? Different presents that they get. Right? I'm sorry, a little before that, it says that only Aaron and his children could serve in the temple, right? Because everybody else, right, lost that ability to do that, right? And then it goes into the Truba and the different Karbanis and the different, it's called the 24 Matnas Kahuna, the 24 presents for the Kohen, gets the leftovers from animals and Truma and all the different things, and that's sort of the rest of the Parsha goes the rest into that. That's just a quick overview, but the majority, more than the majority of the Parsha speaks about, in one way or another, the story of Korach, right, and his cohorts, and the whole and that whole episode of first him and the 250 dying, and then the Jewish people complaining, and then them dying, and then the whole thing with the staff. Right? It sort of goes into that, and that's the majority of this week's parsha. So I want to touch upon a few different points, and hopefully through these different points we'll get a better understanding on this whole Korach situation, right? And grow and learn from these different things that we're going to talk about. So we're going to go all the way back to the beginning, all right? Then we're going to actually start off with the first two words in this week's parsha. Vayikach Korach 8:20, right? In the English 8:21. Vayikach Korach, and Korach took, right? And then it says Ben Yitzhar, Ben Kahas, Ben Levi, right? Vidasim Vaviram, and Dasim Vaviram, right? Va'om Ben Pelas, Bnei Reuven, the children of Reuven. So it says Vayikach, he took. All the commentaries ask, when Vayikach, he took. What did he take? He argued, right? What did he take? Some say that he took these people along with him, right? That's what he dragged all these people along with him. And that's the next verse says, they got up in front of Moshe, right, with the 250 Rosh Nashim, the heads of leaders of the assembly, right? And the Torah actually calls them Anshe Shem. There were people with the name, had merit. They were well-known people. It wasn't like, the slums in the street that, oh, yeah, okay, let's just rebel. These were chashuv people. Right? And then it says what they complained at, they complained to Moshe, and continues. Right? So the comment, what does it mean by Yikach? What does it mean that he took? That doesn't really make sense to say that he took. Instead of it says, Korach, Ben Yitzhak, Ben Kas, Ben Levi, Melod, Vayikumu, and they got up. And so it just says, Vayikumu, they got up. What's Vayikach? Who took? What took? Right? Okay, so we're saying that Korach is sort of took the other people along with him, right? But it's a strange thing to speak that way. So the commentary says, Rashi right here on the spot, if anybody wants to read inside with me in Rashi, right, which is the second Rashi, it's Rashi's underneath, first column on the right side, right, the second set of bold letters, right, it says, Vayikach Korach, Lakach es atzmo litzad acher, lios nichlak b'toch ha'eda la'ara la'kahuna. Lakach es atzmo, he took himself to litzad acher, to the other side, right, in order, right, lios nichlak, in order to argue, right, b'toch ha'eda, in order to be separated from the rest of the Ada, the group, the people of the Jewish people, right? La'ora lakuna, in order to la'ora is to argue, right? Is to be a prosecutor, to say, to make a rebellion against the kahuna, that Aaron got. Right? That's what Rashi says. Right? If you look at the English, number one, they quote the Rashi. Right? For those who want to look at it in the English, Korach separated, literally took himself. Korach placed himself at odds with the rest of the assembly to protest against Aaron's ascendance to the priesthood. Right? And that's what Rashi says. And commentaries expand on this. The Bali Musar also speak about this a lot. That what was it that happened that Korach went to such a degree to argue on Moshe? right? He is known as Lo Tia Korach Kadaso. There's a mitzvah the Torah says later on, and it's a mitzvah, you're not allowed to be like Korach in his assembly, right? He's known for generations and forever as the Baal Machlokas, the one that created Machlokas, disagreement to the highest degree, right? And it's a mitzvah, Lo Tia Korach Vadaso. It's a commandment. You cannot be like Korach and his people. What happened? And don't forget, Korach was not just a regular, simple person. Korach, it says, was from Nosei Aaron. Korach was from one of the four people. There's only four people that were able to carry the Aaron, carry the ark. Right? The ark had two poles, and on each side there was two sides. On each side, each pole had two people carrying, right? Carrying it. And Korach is one of those people. Nosei Aaron, he's one of those people that carried ark. It means he was very lofty. Right? He was very, very lofty. He was a very spiritual person. What happened that he sunk to such a degree that he had the special punishment made up for him, right? That he got swallowed live. Right? And it says that for eternity, he says, Moshe emes v'taraso emes. The Talmud tells us that a certain Amora or Tana found where this place was, and he put his ear to the ground, and he was able to hear, right? Still reverberating, saying Moshe emes v'taraso emes. Now, it could be it was on a spiritual level, on his spiritual level that he was able to do that, right? Able to hear it. But it says that him and his cohorts and his family were saying Moshe emes v'taraso emes. What happened to Korach that he sunk so low, right? That he went so wrong, right? That he's known as the Baal Machlokas. And the answer is that the commentaries what we just spoke about now. And Korach took himself, he separated himself. He felt that he was better than everybody else, right? He didn't have his anava, his humility in check. You could be great and you could be a big Torah scholar and you could have a lot of, spiritual ideas. But when you don't have your humility in check, right? And again, we're talking about on Korach's level, and we have to remember, we have to learn from this, right? It's not for us to judge him, but what we're doing is we're learning from this to make sure that we grow from this. And that's everything in the Torah. Whenever the Torah tells us things, right, it's for us to learn from. But when you don't have that and you feel like you are by yourself, right? Korach took himself, right? Letzad acher, to the other side. I can be myself. I'm good enough, right? I'm strong enough. I'm spiritual enough. I have enough clout to be able to be all by myself and fight against Moshe and fight against all the Jewish people, right? The whole assembly, right? That creates a machlokas, right? That creates for someone to go ahead to and end up to the degree of where he ended up to completely wrong. There was jealousy involved in there also. He didn't claim that it was jealousy, right? And if we would have been around, it's very possible that forget we're talking about great people over here, right? The Torah tells us that on his level it was jealousy, right? He was jealous, right? But if we would have been around, we might not probably not realize there was jealousy. Again, we're talking about great people, and that's something that the Torah is telling us and bringing this out. But where did that jealousy come from? Because he didn't have his humility in check. He didn't have this idea of being able to say that I cannot stand alone, right? But that jealousy combined with his haughtiness, combined with the ability of saying no, I could stand alone. So that generated this whole this whole thing, because it says kinas so from Marba Torah, right? You brought a good point. It's jealousy. The Pirkei Avos says kinas so from, right? Actually, Shlomo Melech says kinas so from the Marba Torah. A jealousy of sofrim of books, right? Marba Torah brings more Torah. Right, so it's a good thing sometimes. You see someone else coming to a Wednesday night class, so you're jealous of them. So you come also to Wednesday night class, right? You see someone else having a chavrusa, right, with someone, so you're jealous. I want to also have a chavrusa, right? So you see someone else that's why sometimes I tell people, I know you want to give especially if someone gives a larger amount donation, and I know you want it to be anonymous, but sometimes when you write it's advertised, you say, oh wow, that person gave a significant whatever it was. Right, wow, okay, so you know what, I could give that also, right? Look, they're getting recognized. Right, so kinna sofrim, a kinna of doing something good. Marbatar brings more Torah, brings more mitzvos. Right, so on the contrary, kinna is not a bad thing. It could be not bad thing. Like everything could be not bad, but this kinna was not a kinna of Sofrim. It was a kinna because it was based off his haughtiness of thinking that he could be himself. And that's the root. That's the root of machlokas. Right? And that's the same thing. The Pirkei Avos says, Kol machlokas shelo l'shem shamayim. Any machlokas that's not for the sake of heaven, right? Ein sof l'skaim will not endure. But any machlokas l'shem shamayim, machlokas for the sake of heaven, will endure. What's a machlokas that's not l'shem shamayim? Korach v'adaso. Right? What's the machlokas l'shem shamayim? Hillel and Shammai. And we know there's plenty all the time in the Talmud. It's full of machlokas. Hillel and Shammai, Rav and Abaya, Rav Yechon and Rav Shlakas, right? Abaya, Rabba and Rav Zera, right? Rambam and Nachmanides, Rashi and Tosfos, right? The Bach and the Shach, the Ramah and Beis Yosef, right? Throughout, even now, right? There's constantly machlokas. Right, so what's the difference between these machlokas? It's not l'shem shamayim. It's not for the sake of heaven, because when you are arguing for the sake of heaven, you are not arguing for yourself. You're arguing for the purpose of what we want to try to understand, and therefore, it will never turn into something about you. It's about the Torah, right? And you'll never become in a derogatory way. You'll never be against people, right? It's trying to understand the Torah, right? That's what it is. It's understand Torah, but when it's not l'shem shamayim, but it's not for the sake of heaven. What is it? It says Korach va'adasa, Korach and his cohorts. The commentaries all ask, right? Commentaries all ask. 1 second. They were all on the same side. When you have a machlokas, you have one person saying this and one person saying that. So what should have been the machlokas? Korach and Moshe, right? But it doesn't say that. It says Korach v'adasa, Korach and his people, because that's Hagufa. That's exactly the answer. Because Moshe was not part of this machlokas. Moshe was machlok shem shamayim. Lo chamaracha lokach. They didn't take one. Moshe. We're going to talk. We'll jump for a minute. Right? If you turn the page. Right, verse 12, 822, since we're on this topic, right, it says, Vayishlach Moshe likros adasim v'avirim. Moshe called out to call, right, Vayishlach, Moshe sent out a messenger, and likros, to call and to bring dasim v'avirim, right, to reach out to them. What does it say? Vayamru lo nala, we're not going to go up. And then they have to add on. Not only did you not bring us to the land of Zavas Chalav Advas, Teretz Yisrael, but you're just leaving us to die here, right? So why should we come here, right? And seek talk to you, even right? So Moshe Rabbeinu, he reached out to them because Moshe Rabbeinu wanted peace. He did not want to argue. And Moshe Rabbeinu was not arguing with them. Moshe Rabbeinu was for the sake of heaven. He knew what the Torah was telling him, right? He had no ears about him to go ahead and say, you know what, I'm going to reach out to them. Usually we say, no, let them. What's the thing that keeps machokas going? The other person has to apologize first. The other person should come and talk to me. All right. First, that's always the bottom. The one of the main things in machlokas that keeps machlokas going is when each one feels that the other one should come to them. Right, come to me to talk. Okay, then we'll talk. Right? Now come to me. No, Moshe Rabbeinu, Moshe said, come, let's talk. Right? Come, let's talk. He reached out to them. Right? Because he didn't want machlokas. So it's Korach va'adasa, Korach and his cohorts, because each one of them, right, just wanted for themselves. They weren't wanting for what Hashem really wants. They wanted, so over here, they wanted something that was spiritual. Yes, it was a spiritual thing that they wanted. Right? But they wanted something just for themselves. It wasn't what Hashem wants. It wasn't what's good for Klal Yisrael, for the Jewish people. It was what they wanted. So each one of the 250 people were arguing with each other. Korach and Hadassah, Korach and his cohorts, they're all arguing with each other. And that's not a machlok shemshemay, because that's being revolved around yourself. That's just thinking about yourself, and that's the key of haughtiness. The key of gaiva is being revolved around yourself, just thinking about yourself. What do I need? What do I get? What can make me better? Right? How could I gain from this situation? And not thinking about other people. Right? That is Lakach atzmo l'tzarachi. He took himself to his own side. I mean to say that he didn't physically move himself, but he internally took himself away from everybody else, not thinking about what other people care about, only what he needs, what he cares about. Right? And this is something that we could all reflect on a certain level, and something that we could all work on, right? Because we all have it a little bit, right? And I'm talking to myself that we think about ourselves. Right? And don't get me wrong, sometimes, we do need to a little bit, right? And, sometimes, you hear these people, well, it's me time. And, and then even in psychology and in, and then therapists, they have, you got to take care of yourself, and you can only help other people if you are healthy yourself, which is true. And I've told this to people too. And don't get me wrong, right? I've told this to people sometimes when we talk, and if sometimes when people ask me about certain things, I said, you got to take care of yourself first. But you're not taking care of yourself just to be revolved around yourself, right? You have to be healthy, right? You have to financially be healthy. You have to physically be healthy. You have to emotionally be healthy. Of course, that's not being revolved around yourself, but it's the next step. Is if you're not caring about other people, you say, no, I can't give any charity because I need to make sure that, maybe I want to go on a trip to around the world on my sailboat, right? And so therefore I don't have any money to give charity, right? Or my great grandkids, I have to make sure that I have, tuition for my great grandkids' college fund. You know what? It ain't the davar sof, right? That's of course you have to make sure your kids, and you have to make sure help out. But Mirza Hashem, your kids will also be successful, right? And yes, have some money for the grandkids. Don't get me wrong, right? But to be hoarding your money around because you're really thinking about yourself. You're thinking about yourself. I need what I need, right? Or if it's helping other people out. No, I can't go. It's too hot outside. I'm in a heat, and you're fine. We're not talking about where. Of course, if it's dangerous for you, don't go outside. But But if otherwise, right? Get up. Go to daven, right? So don't think about yourself. You have to make sure the shul has a minyan. Besides thinking about yourself that you want to daven with a minyan, right? But besides that, but also think about the shul to make sure that the shul has a minyan. Whatever it is, helping other people out. That's the key of growth, is making sure that you're not revolved around yourself. When you're revolved around yourself, then everything starts changing, and everything your whole logic also changes. And to the extent that Korach, who was Noseh Aaron, who carried the ark, right, fell prey, right, to his logic, right, his logic of thinking that Moshe Rabbeinu gave Aaron the kahuna for himself, right, and not because Hashem said so, and went ahead and fought with Moshe Rabbeinu. So that was the root of everything, and that's why Rashi goes ahead and says, and that's what the Torah is teaching us by saying Vayikach, right, because that one word Vayikach really defines, right, the root of what happened, and what we have to work on ourselves to make sure that we don't fall prey to this, right? Now, of course, Mirza Hashem, never on that level, but even on a smaller level, right? If it's our tzedakah giving, if it's our time giving, if it's our learning, if it's our relationship with other people, if it's our relationship with our spouse, if it's whatever it is, right? We have our relationship with Hashem, right? We have to work on that, because that's really the root of all evil. When one is just revolved around themselves. Any questions or comments? Okay, so then let's move on. So the Torah goes ahead, and at the end of verse 1, we're still on verse 1, right? The end of verse 1, it says, Dasav Aviram, Bnei Eliyav, Va'on Ben Peletz, Bnei Ruvain, the children of Reuven, the offspring of Reuven. Right, so these people were from the tribe of Reuven, and then it says, next verse, now Rashi says, right, that these 250 people, right, were also from the tribe of Reuven, right? right? Reuven, Reuben, Meshavet, Reuven. Majority of them, Rashi says the majority. Doesn't say all of them. Rashi says that the majority of them were for the tribe of Reuven also, and goes ahead and speaks about Reuven. Right, so the commentaries ask why Reuven more than others? Like, what's going on over here, right? Why was the tribe of Reuven more affected, right, than any other tribe, right? Where okay, Dustin very were anyways troublemakers, but what was it that the 200 Anshe Shem, these lofty people, there were lofty people, right? That only from the not all only, but from the majority of them came from the tribe of Reuven. So Rashi says a famous line. It's a Gemara. Rashi says, where is it? Give me 1 second. Okay, if I can't find it, it's fine. I'll just say it. Okay, we're running out of time. I'll just say it. Rashi says out there, right? Rashi says, right? He says, why them? Say, Ola Rasha, Ola Shchenov, right? It's a midrash. Woe to a evil person, woe to his neighbor, right? What does that mean, right? Because if you remember in Parshas Bamidbar, right, when it speaks about the encampments of the Jewish people, so the Jewish people encamped in a group of three, right? And there was the tribe of Ruvain and two others, tribe of Yehuda and two others, and then the Mishka was in the middle, and then the tribes of Levi, the families of Levi also encamped around the Mishkan, and Moshe and his family lived like right there. So Korach, right? It says Korach is right next to the tribe of Reuven. Right? That's what it's Korach. The way it was positioned, Korach was next to the tribe of Reuven. That's what the Midrash tells us. So woe to a Rasha, woe to his neighbor, woe to a Rasha, woe to Korach who was a Rasha, right? And woe to a neighbor because the influence of the neighbor of the Rasha, right, affects that these 250 Sanhedrin, there were leaders of Klal Yisrael got infected. And they got infected by Korach, right, by his words and by his, again, don't forget, he was also considered people like this is a respectful person also, right, got infected by him, and woe to Rasha, woe to his neighbors. So it's just something to reflect on and to think about, that sometimes we feel, right, and I don't want to get onto this topic too much, but I'm just going to sort of throw this idea out, right? That sometimes people feel that it's not why are we not learning about certain topics, right? It's important to know, read certain people's theories or different philosophers' ideas, and once you reach a certain level, it is dam aliyah salam arts. You have to know what to answer to someone that questions you, right? But in our schools, or it's okay, it's okay if I have friends or converse philosophical discussions with other people that have a different faith than me, or someone that has a negative to either Judaism or to the world, right? And or a neighbor doesn't have to be literally your physical next door neighbor. It could be someone that you continuously in converse with, be it if it's on a chat somewhere, right, or if it's your coffee or wherever it is, because we get influenced, and we say, well, I won't get influenced. No, we do get influenced unless you are really strong, right? Unless you really have a backbone, right? We get influenced, and therefore it speaks about you're not allowed to read certain heresy. You're not allowed to learn that. There's halachas about it. It's not simple, right? There was someone who, I don't know, you guys might know, heard of his name. His name is Michael Skoback, right? He's a big guy in Jews for Judaism. Excuse me, a big guy in Jews for Judaism, a tzaddik of a yid. Right? He also does a lot of things with. He also works a lot with people that get into cults and tries to get them out of cults and things like that. And remember, he told me once, he was at our Shabbos table, and he told me once that before he learned the New Testament, right, he asked a Shiloh. right? But now, he had to learn it because this was what he was going into. But he went ahead and he spoke to his rabbi, and his rabbi asked him this and that, and had a whole back and forth with him, right? Are you holding this? How well do you know the Talmud? How well do you know the commentary? This, and he was Talmud Chacham, right? He was a right, and his rabbi said, okay, you can learn it, but every time, make sure you keep a kesher with me, right? Because it wasn't just time, oh, it's knowledge, it's good to know. No, he only went ahead and he learned it. They say he knows it better than the priests, but that he only went ahead and he learned it because that was his job, right? That's what he was doing. That was his avodas Hashem, and that's one of the lessons that we have to learn from this is, right, that we have to be wary of it. It's something to be wary of. We do get influenced by our surroundings. We do get influenced by what we read. Right? We get influenced by our neighbors. Right? We get influenced by the company that we keep. And yes, sometimes, especially as someone grows, it doesn't mean to say that we cut off all ties, but sometimes we have to find a little different group of friends, especially if that group of friends is unfortunately constantly talking in a negative way about Yiddishkeit, about Judaism, about mitzvot. Right? Of course, we have to try to influence them as much as we can, but at the same time, this is sometimes where you have to worry about yourself, about your own spiritual growth. Right? And that's what it says. Oh, the Rasha, l'schein of woe to a Rasha, woe to his neighbor. Right? Because look at these 250 righteous people that got influenced by Korach. I don't want to talk about that more. It's an important topic, but there's other things that we need to talk about. So let's continue. So one of the Rashi says that by Akilu they gathered, right, and they spoke to Moshe, right, and they had a few complaints, and it says not only about the complaint about the Kohen, but Korach was trying to use his knowledge to sort of undermine Moshe, and you see this happen many times. That you have this person that I've had it sometimes with people like question is the question there because you really want to know or your comment, or is it a question because you're trying to like undermine, like, oh, do you know this, right? Do you are you? And I don't claim to know everything, right? By a long shot, right? But you've seen this sometimes. Sometimes when someone asks a certain question, it's sort of like antagonizing. It's try to do you know that? And try to undermine the rabbi, or undermine the teacher, or undermine the person. So they asked two questions. Korach and his cohorts asked two questions. I mean, plenty more, because they stayed up that whole night. Right? And one of the questions that they came to Moshe, Korach came wearing a talus, right? Tzitzis, a talus that was all tchelas, right? Tchelas is that special blue dye that you can't buy it in Home Depot, right? Right? It's a special blue dye that comes from the Kinneret, from a fish, a snail, right? We're not sure what it is. Some people think they do. I don't want to get into tchelas right now, right? But he came with. We came on with that the whole baguette, the whole garment, and the tzitzis were all tchelas, right? It says the talus was full of tchelas. Right? And they came from Amur Lo, talus shukol tchelas, the talus that's full of tchelas. Right? Chayiv b'tzitzis or patur? Is it obligated in tzitzis or is it not? Right? Amar lehem chayiv. He said it's obligated. They started laughing at him. Right? Efser, is it possible? Talus shel min echad chut echad tchelas. Right? When you have a talus and you have one string that is tchelas, it's okay. The whole thing now is good. Right? Shouldn't it sort of be good itself, right? And that was their question. The Talmud continues, Midrash continues. It said they also had another one, right? They had if a room is full of svarim, the base Midrash, right? The room is full of svarim. Does it need a mezuzah? Right? The mezuzah is only 3 parshios of Shema. Right? Does it need a mezuzah? And they started laughing. How if you have a room full of what's it called again? And so and they had other things, but that was sort of their questions. Right? And we look at this like, really, what kind of question? Like, what are you thinking? It's not the tzitzis or the tzitzis and the bag. They're like, that's the mitzvah, right? So this is, again, along the same lines that one has to realize, right, that these questions, and this is what happens when you get full of yourself, and this is what happens when you start just thinking, right, of your way of thinking, right? They were coming to antagonize Moshe. It was coming to look. We have knowledge too. We know halacha. We know Talmud. We know this. And doesn't it make sense that this is the way it should be? You know what? First of all, it doesn't make sense. We'll talk about that. But even if it does make sense, that's not what the Torah says. That's not what Moshe Rabbeinu. That's not what Hashem said. Right? Moshe Rabbeinu received everything from the Torah. That's the halacha, right? We want to understand it to say why is it that if you have a beged, the beged, the garment is full of tchelas, right? Why is it that it doesn't pot? Why is it that you still need to have a string of tzitzis, right, with tchelas on it, right? Why is that, right? Shouldn't it be that that's the way if that's something that you really want to know, so then you'll go ahead and ask it like that. Not that, well, shouldn't it be this way? And then start laughing and say, how could that be? Right? Because that's, again, when you revolve around yourself, your logic gets tainted about how you want it to be. Right? Again, this is such an important piece of information, right? And I try to, this is something that we all have to work on, right? We might have talked about this. I'm sure we have. Now, when we put on our tefillin, right? When we put on our tefillin, what do we put on first? Our hand, right? And then we put on our head, right? And then we take off our head, and then we take off our hand. So our hand always has to be on while the head is on. Why? Right? Why? That's what we do. That's true. But why? Right? And the answer is, right, one of the reasons that are given is because the tefillin are reminding us of a covenant between us and Hashem. Right, Shema, right, has a Parshah of Shema inside, right, reminding us that we always have to have Hashem with us, right, and it's telling us like this, that even though the head is by the moach, it's by our thought, it's by the way we think, right, and we have to make sure that our logic is always in tune and working with Hashem, right, but really, right, it says the Parsha says lei mechashev, the heart thinks, right, and the heart, what do you mean the heart thinks? The heart doesn't think. No. Our desires, our heart represents our desires, our what we want, our controls really what we think, right, and therefore we have to make sure that we have our tefillin by our, that's why it's against our heart, and we have our tefillin always on when the hand, which represents the heart, right? Well, we have the head on, right? Because the head needs to have the tefillin of the heart, because the tefillin of the hand, which is by the heart, is controlled. We remind ourselves that our logic can be tainted. Yes, it's not always logical, right? So many times, right, when you stop to think about it, the logic that we have is really tainted to our desires, right? It's tainted to our desires many times. Right? It's mind-boggling when someone stops and reflects and say, "Wow, that someone else thinks differently." And that's really, again, back to machlokas shem shemaim. Machlokas shem shemaim is not tainted by the heart. It's tainted. It's not tainted by the heart by your own desire. It's trying to figure out the same thing, and therefore. Hillel and Shammai's kids married each other, right? And Rav and Abaye were best friends, and it's not a personal thing. It's trying to figure out. It's not tainted by your own desire. You're trying to figure out. But Korach and Hadassah, Machlokas Lo Shem Shamayim is tainted by your own desire. If you're actually able to get out of yourself and stop and say, "Whoa, what's going on here?" You'll see a whole new picture. You can't see it. You'll never be able to see it because you're only tainted by your own desire. Right, and that's why they were able to ask this silly question, right? Of a house that's full of svarim, or a cloth, a garment that's full of tchelas, if it needs the mitzvah of tzitzis or it doesn't need a mitzvah of tzitzis, because they were tainted and revolved around themselves. Moshe Feinstein says something very beautiful. It says Moshe Feinstein, what is the reason, right? What is the reason why, if you have a garment full of tchelas, why does it still need a tzitzis? Why isn't it a pater? Why you still need a tzitzis and have one of the strings tchelas? Says Moshe, because what's the tchelas? Tchelas, and again, the real reason is because that's what I said. So that's it. Now we talked about this. Now for us to grow from, and because that's, of course, there's always reasons, and there's other reasons, and the Torah is full of wisdom. But says Moshe Feinstein, one of the things that we can learn from this is, because the tchelas represents a sky. What's the idea of tchelas? It says you look at the tchelas, so you look at it, it'll remind you of the sky. It will remind you that we have to serve Hashem, that you look at the sky and remind you that Hashem runs the world, right? And that's emunah, it's building our faith in Hashem. Right? Says Moshe Feinstein, he says, when you have a garment full of tchelas, it's sort of it's trying to take everything on one time. It's trying to take the whole emunah, your whole faith at one time, like a big garment, big thing, right? That's not how we grow. Then you'll collapse and you'll fall, right? It says in Moshe Feinstein, you have one string, and that's why only one string needs chelas, not the whole. And if on the contrary, if they have more than one string has chelas, it's not kosher, it's not tzitzis, right? If you have chelas, right? So he said because one string, because it's one step at a time. Right? You look at the one string and you say, I could do this. It's not overwhelming. It's not crazy. I'm not going to collapse from it. Right? I take one step at a time. Remind me of Hashem. Build my emunah, build my mitzvos. But I take one string at a time, right? One step at a time. And that's one of the reasons, says Moshe, that actually that's how it is. And the way it is it's one string to remind us that yes, when we look at the string, right, you look at the tzitzis, it reminds us of Shemayim, it reminds us of emunah of Hashem, but we're able to do it one step at a time. Now we got to do it one step at a time, right? We got to do it one step at a time. But we that's how we're supposed to do it, is by growing one step at a time, says Moshe Feinstein. And I think that's just a beautiful idea. Okay, we have a few more minutes before we get kicked out. All right, chas v'shalom, but the mincha, chas v'shalom, mincha. All right, so let's tackle another interesting thing over here. All right, so if you turn the page, if you turn to page 824, so after the earth swallows Korach and his people, and we spoke about that, and then the fire goes out, right, and kills all the 250 people. And then it says, God says, God's thrown, before everybody gets swallowed. Sorry, I apologize. We're before that. So in verse 20, God says to Moshe, verse 21, separate from this group of people, because I'm going to eat them. I'll eat them. It's an interesting language that it uses. It didn't say it's v'harigim and I'll kill them. It says v'achla, right? V'akala, and I'll destroy them. I'll destroy them, right? Karega right now. Vayipu al paneim, and they fell on their face. V'yamru elokei ruchos, right? God, chol basar ish echad yichtav chol ha'edei tiksof, right? God, Moshe and Aaron, who again, this whole fight was against Moshe and Aaron. This whole fight was against Moshe and Aaron. So if God tells you the whole fight's against you, and God says, move yourself, separate yourself, because I'm going to get rid of them, what do you say? Yay! Right? We won! Right? We did it! We're on the right side! Right? Okay, losers! Right? But what did Moshe and Aaron do? Moshe Rabbeinu, pilu al paneim, they fall on their face for Yomru, and they said, right? Tell ruchos, right? God, or the Spirit, right? L'chol basar, the Spirit of all life. Right? Each echad yechata, one man sins, right? V'kala eda tiktsof, and you'll get angry on the whole assembly, right? Now, let's take this a step back. If the whole eda were completely innocent, they shouldn't have let this go to the extent that it went. Right? Let's just put this in perspective for a second. Right? Yes, the whole eda were not on Korach's side, let's say. Right? But as what's the famous saying goes, right? I don't remember what the famous saying goes, but the idea, right, that if you're just standing by, right? What is that? I forgot. It's like if you're standing, you're not innocent. You're part of it. You're complicit, right? You're complicit. If you're not doing anything, just standing by, you're complicit, right? Right. So they were just standing by, right? So it's 250 heads of state, right? Korach and his cohorts, right? His family, right? And you got the rest of the Klal Yisrael. We're talking about over 6 million people, right? Right? Give or take, let's say, whatever, even 1,000 people. They could have very easily, right, stopped this whole thing. I said, hey, what are you fighting with Moshe for? He's our leader. He's the one that took us out, right? Korach, go put you in jail. Let's deal with you later, right? Stop this whole nonsense, right? But they didn't do anything, right? So they're not so innocent, right? Yes, they weren't involved in the acts of machlokas, but as you said, they're complicit. And then we'll see in a minute, like we talked that when we did the overview. And actually later, right, they complained to Moshe and Aaron, right? And it's just a few verses, right? They say, um, uh, page 828, right? Vayilinu kol adas b'nei Yisrael, right? After everything happened, right? Verse 6, right? And all the entire assembly of the children complained, right? Against Moshe, right? Al Moshe, al Aaron. They were atam mesim Hashem. You guys killed Klal Yisrael, right? They go ahead and they now shove it into their faces. And you guys are the one that killed Klal Yisrael, right? So again, we're not talking about, but what does Moshe and Aaron do? Moshe and Aaron, they fall on their face. That's a true leader. That's someone that's ashamed Shemaim, not revolved around themselves. Right? They said one man sinned, one man actually did the sin. Right? Right? Itself and the whole nation should get punished for it, to get the anger. Right? That's just Hashem. Don't do that. So that's when my Dabar Hashem, Dabar al Kalei, the Lemar, everybody should leave Korach. And then whoever decides to stay, that's their fault. Right? And it says some people stayed, right? But that's their fault. If they decided to stay, now that's their fault. But that's a true leader, and that's a true Eved Hashem. And the Eved Hashem, a servant of Hashem, right, does not gloat by the downfall. Tismach b'nefol avecha. Do not be happy with the fall of your enemy, right? And not only that, to the extent of making sure, saving lives, and making sure that not everybody gets punished, right? They could have just kept quiet and Hashem would have wiped out everybody that was sort of in that area, right? Because it could be people were in their tents and they were not even nothing. They stayed away. But, you always know there's a crowd. All of a sudden a big crowd comes, a fight, in the park or whatever it is, right? So those people that were around there, right? They were even more complicit. No, but Moshe and Aaron fell on their faces, so we can't let this happen. And that's the Eved Hashem. That's the servant of Hashem, right? And that's what we have to learn, right? That's how we have to grow. We have to remember that and ensure, right, that we are always not revolved around ourselves. That's the Yisod Hadaber over here. Korach and his cohorts were revolved around themselves. That's why it led to machlokas. That's why it led not caring about it. That's why it led for them not to be able to think properly. That's why it led for them to make these silly questions, right? And to argue against Moshe Rabbeinu, right? But Moshe and Aaron were always thinking about everybody else, right? Everything that they did was for Hashem, right? And with that was making sure no one else got hurt. The least amount of people got hurt, and even reaching out to Dustin Vavirim and everything else we spoke about. Thank you all for joining us, and we'll be in touch.